Percy is a little green engine. He enjoys his work on the Fat Controller's railway. He can do any job he is given. Shunting trucks in the yard, pulling goods trains, and delivering the mail. Sometimes he can feel a little worried about any new job that he is given, because they don't sound nice for him at first. One evening, the Fat Controller came to Tidmouth Sheds. "The ironworks scrapyard needs some help with extra shunting for some scrap metal," he said. "Percy, I want you and Toby to help out there for a few weeks, starting tomorrow night." "Me?" Percy cried. "And Toby as well," replied the Fat Controller, and left. "You'd better keep working very hard while you're there, Percy," James teased, "or the scrap diesels might get you." "What are the scrap diesels?" Percy asked, feeling a little scared. "They are 2 diesel engines who work at the ironworks. They look for engines that aren't really useful anymore. Some of them refuse to work non-stop and they cause careless accidents. Then they are taken to the smelter shed where they never see daylight again. So you'd better work very hard as a way of being careful if you want to stay in service." Percy was feeling very scared. He did not like this at all. The next evening, Percy and Toby arrived at the ironworks. Percy shivered. "I'm glad you're here to keep me company, Toby," he puffed. "But the scrapyard is very scary," put in Toby. "I agree, but the sooner we get the work done, the sooner we can rest with ease." "But what about the scrap diesels that James told me about? If I don't keep being useful, they could scrap me," Percy cried. Toby sighed. "James is only teasing. Don't listen to him. Now come on, it's time to work." As Percy puffed around the yard shunting trucks, he saw strange, eerie shapes. They were old engines who were once useful, but sadly were taken out of service and sent here. Now what was left of them was empty shells and broken parts. One by one, once taken to most pieces, they would be sent to a large shed where the metal is melted down. It's called the smelter shed. When Percy took trucks into the shed, he would see a large melting pit. Percy shuddered as he looked towards the pit, imagining how brutal it must feel when you are dropped into it. He would rush out of the shed as quickly as he could. He did not want to stay in the shed any longer every time he dropped off his trucks. He thought if he worked as quickly as he could, the scrap diesels wouldn't scrap him. Later, Percy was still working at his best when he heard a strange sound. "What's that?" he wailed. "I can hear clanking noises." "That's probably one of the warehouses working their machinery," said Toby. "There's nothing to worry about." But poor Percy wasn't sure. On the other side of the yard, there were some trucks moving backwards and forwards, banging each other's buffers. Then, a voice called loudly. "Look at these engines!" called the voice. "They aren't very useful anymore because they didn't work very hard and cause big crashes. Yeah, especially the tank engines. I reckon there is one around here that is curvy, green and small. Hey, yeah, let's look for it and see if we can scrap it for not being really useful. Good idea." Percy gasped. "What am I doing? I must get back to work," he puffed urgently. Suddenly, he rammed his trucks straight into another set on the track. "Bust my buffers!" he exclaimed. Luckily, no one was hurt. As soon as a crane had moved the derailed trucks up away from the track, Percy saw two square shapes in the distance. They were diesels who had just arrived. "The scrap diesels!" Percy shouted, whistling frantically. "They saw that I've done a careless accident, and now they're going to scrap me!" Percy raced away as fast as he could. But he didn't get very far. Percy wasn't watching where he was going. "Please don't scrap me!" cried Percy. "I'm sorry I caused the accident. I didn't mean it. I'm a useful engine! I'm a useful engine!" "Put down with that screaming!" shouted a voice. Percy opened his eyes. He saw the two diesels in front of him. "What are you yelling about? Yeah, we just arrived here 2 days ago, and we get cowardly steam engines like you trying to grind our gears. What are you yelling, 'Please don't scrap me,' for?" Percy was puzzled. "You mean you're not going to scrap me after the crash I caused?" he stammered. No," grunted the diesels loudly. Although our job is to deal with those who make great scrap, which we are certainly going to enjoy. Harry and Bert!" The Fat Controller had just arrived. "What is the meaning of this? You're not making trouble for my engines, are you?" "No, sir, of course not," they said. "We just found this old steamy running himself off track, begging not to be scrapped." The Fat Controller turned to Percy. I'm sorry, sir. I thought I heard these diesels saying they would scrap me if I wasn't useful, or after I caused an accident. Then I crashed some trucks and panicked. I thought they were coming after me." "We weren't, sir. Honest," oiled Harry. Just then, James rolled in. He was shocked. "Blistering boilers!" he chuffed. "You are real. You're the scrap diesels." The Fat Controller looked at James. "What are you doing here?" "Do you know anything about this?" he asked. I told Percy he must be useful or the diesels would scrap him. Then I pretended to be them to give him a scare. James had been the one bashing the trucks and intimidating his so-called scrap diesel characters, which did turn out to be Harry and Bert, but not the way that James had explained it. Well, James, seeing as how you know the game called Be Useful or Be Scrapped, you can make yourself useful for the next 2 days shunting around Knapford. And perhaps Harry and Bert will watch you to see that you are staying useful and you're not causing trouble. Unless you want to be scrapped. James shuddered nervously. Yes, sir. Sorry, sir. Harry and Bert sniggered, but only in a neutral, spiteful way that they were brought up in. And as for you, Percy, continued the Fat Controller, I hope you know that whatever joke James tells you, it's not something for you to believe. Being useful does not mean not refusing to work or causing crashes. It means proving that you are able to do the work to help those in need, responsibly and reliably. And you are a really useful engine because that's the way you do the work. So you will never ever be scrapped. Percy felt very relieved. Sorry I played a trick on you, Percy. Percy doesn't mind working at the scrapyard now. He still finds it very scary, but remembers what the Fat Controller had told him. Harry and Bert, the scrap diesels, work there now. Part of the story James had told was somewhat true, but Harry and Bert only scrap any engine that is sadly withdrawn, but not because they cause accidents or refuse to work. Even though, sometimes, they will play tricks on other steam engines that arrive. Particularly Percy. Nonetheless, Percy will always do the work that he is given. Whether he is scared or not, he always proves that he is a really useful engine.